Welcome, dear viewer, to UBC TV, and it's COVID talk. COVID-19, the pandemic is still with us, but together we shall overcome. Now today, we look at agriculture for sustainable COVID recovery. How do we get out of this? How do we actually, how do we fight poverty? How do we rebuild ourselves using agriculture? Because most of the things, especially the economy, is going down as a result of the lockdowns and other effects of now COVID-19. Now with me or joining me through Zoom from the United States is Keid Awadu, who is actually an author and also a researcher. He has done extensive research in agriculture here in Uganda. You're welcome.
Greetings. It's a pleasure absolutely to be with you today with our beautiful audience all across Uganda on this magnificent network, UBC TV.
I'm glad that we are all dressed like Pan-Africans, and therefore we shall take a Pan-African angle in this discussion. And of course, we Africans, of course, agriculture has always been the backbone of our economy, of our income. Now, let's look at agriculture, how it can be used to save the situation that the continent, the African people have found themselves in as a result of COVID-19.
The strength of a nation is defined by the work that its people are capable of, committed to, as well as the natural resources. Uganda has been blessed in so many ways with tremendous agricultural potential. The growing season, extended year-long growing season in Uganda is a great advantage. And in the aftermath of such a significant, serious economic shock to the nation is really going to stand on its foundation, its fundamentals. This also includes a demographic dividend. Uganda is the second youngest nation in the world behind Niger. And this is a very great advantage to the nation, realizing that the availability of high quality, low cost labor added to Uganda's natural agricultural bounty, its harvest, its abundance of land capable of supporting agriculture, water. It's just such a great potential. I have been working with a group, a corporation we've put together called the African Future, which is already committed to leasing farmland and growing food for local consumption as well as export market in the western part of Uganda. So based upon the strategic plan
you conducted has actually been affected by the pandemic and of course slowed down its progress. Of course, agriculture is one of the sectors that are still up and running, though so still it has been affected by the pandemic. Now, what is coming out clearly is the market, both the domestic market and the foreign market for the agricultural produces in Uganda. What ought to be done so that really, one, there's no price fluctuation, so that also the quality of the products, agricultural products in Uganda, can compete at world market?
We must have a holistic plan, a plan that covers all aspects of the society, both its assets and its liabilities. Again, we'd mentioned about Uganda has a very young population, so the availability of labor for any particular industrial initiative is always going to be a great advantage. Uganda also, beyond that, Uganda has a number of things that need to be put into place. In my book, The Blackest Soil, Africa Can Feed the World, we talked about the critical need for us to build out and to control the entirety of the food value chain. This begins with the inputs that go into agriculture, such as fertilizer, farming tools, heavy equipment, irrigation systems, but it also includes the labor is a significant part of the food value chain. Of course, access to the land and to proper seed stock. And I love the fact that Uganda is the second highest number of registered organic farmers behind India in the entire world. And this is very significant advantage because Uganda's food products then in the international market will have a much higher market value because many people prefer to pay extra money for organic crops. It's also wonderful for Uganda's youth population to grow up eating clean and pristine food. I talk about these critical inputs, land, labor. The climate for Uganda is perfect for growing foods. One of the biggest food production areas of the world for the last several decades has been the state of California in the United States, where I lived for 30 years. I've just recently moved next door to the state of Nevada in Las Vegas. But California is now in its 8th year of a very severe drought. And so the water systems that have been feeding California's agriculture have become increasingly expensive. So therefore, the output in the crops have become increasingly expensive. Uganda can step right into this place. Uganda has the potential to produce as much agricultural output as the state of California. Checking the statistics on arable land capacity, Uganda, with a current population, I believe, of slightly above 40 million people, has the potential to feed 100 million people. I think that this could be accomplished by the year 2025, integrating itself into the East African community where it's already exporting significant food production, and integrating into, of course, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. Uganda is in a prime position to come out of this pandemic-associated recession and become one of the absolute leading food producers of the generation. I'm excited about that possibility.
Well, you're talking of Uganda being being turned into one of the leading producers of food in the region. But of course, this has a number of impediments, and one of them is over-relying on the traditional methods of farming. Now, how can Uganda expeditiously adopt modern farming methods so that perhaps we can realize your dream of being the food basket of East and Central Africa?
That's such a very important question. And there are really two tracks which can be taken. First of all, we can take the traditional food production for agricultural track, and that is, of course, using more heavy equipment, more synthetic fertilizers, using irrigation systems, etc., and producing monocropping is what they call it, on large scale. Yet then again, when we talk about food in the world food market and the value chain, producing high quality food requires more personal labor, because organic products, you're not using chemicals, you're not spraying whole fields and these type of things, do require more people to be input. Because such a high percentage of Ugandans have been existing in subsistence farming, the strategic plan that I think is best for the nation is to not to exclude these people, forcing many of them to have to migrate to urban centers and then look for other type of industries to be able to be in. I think our plan, best plan, and I consider myself to be a Ugandan, I am married to a Ugandan, I think that our best plan would include the subsistence farmers, only upgrade them. They have strategies that would help that. I am the inventor of a solar-based food dehydrator. At present, some 30% of African agricultural products spoil before getting to market. We know that poor infrastructure, poor storage, the lack of refrigerated trucks, and the lack of local refrigerated storage systems all contributes to this 30% wastage of Uganda, of Africa's agricultural products, costing the continent 100 billion US dollars per year. With a 50% reduction of food spoilage using techniques like the cold storage, transportation systems, and dehydrating fruits and some vegetables at point of use instead of having to ship them hundreds of kilometers away to be processed, I think is going to be significant. I predict that we could cut food wastage on the African continent by 50% per year, freeing up 50 billion US dollars to be inserted into other aspects of the industrial development.
Yes, you see, it is said that you are what you eat, and definitely through agriculture, we have managed as a continent to develop our herbs. And in some areas, they are actually saying that herbs are proving to be a better remedy to COVID-19. Yes, how do we turn herbs or African herbs, or how do we develop them so that perhaps they can actually compete, yes, at international level with the drugs, medicines, and vaccines we are getting from the West?
My brother Mazma, you give me goosebumps when you ask me that question. That's one of my favorite subjects, and I write about it extensively in a number of my books. We can look at what we call traditional African medicine. TAM is the abbreviation. And we can use as a model for its potential, we can compare it to traditional Chinese medicine, TCM. In 2017, the value of traditional Chinese medicine in the world market amounted to, I think it was about $175 billion market. It was predicted by the end of 2020, largely due to the impact of the pandemic, that traditional Chinese medicine would expand to $400 billion in the global market valuation. So I say that traditional African medicine, which at this particular point, unfortunately, is grossly undervalued at perhaps $16 to $20 billion at most, could be turned on a massive scale. In the book, I list some 11 traditional African medicines that are distinct, or the greatest sourcing of them is on the African continent. And I know by using seed stocks from other parts of the world, in the climates such as Uganda, the list of traditional medicines that can be produced, herbal medicines, and the extracts from them could be expanded significantly. In my book, I predict ultimately, by the year 2050, African continent can create a 4.3 trillion US dollar export industry for its agricultural products. And of that, I attribute perhaps 20 to 25% of that phenomenal amount of export income to the export and the use of traditional African medicine herbs.
Well, let's look at you Africans who are now part of the US, who are part of the developed world. What should be your role in marketing our traditional African medicine now, especially that even some quarters, some spheres in the Western world are actually beginning to believe in our herbal medicine?
Admittedly, we are very late to seize this opportunity when the opportunity was there even before the current state of the pandemic. And as a consequence of recognizing that we have been late, it's like the runner who intends to win the long distance race, even though they may only get the bronze and the silver at the 2021 Olympics. Even if they start way back in the pack, they put together a pace for them to win the race. And this is what we must do. We must organize a pace to win the race. A number of inputs. We had talked about the entirety of the 10-point food value chain must be put into place. And that includes not only export, but it includes import on the part of African communities, as well as non-African communities around the world who will welcome many agricultural products, traditional African medicine, when it is presented to them. I have done the best that I can, and now with my association with UBC, I think I can improve my efforts to convince African American investors to bring your money to the mother continent. Expect a much higher return on your investments than you're currently getting from some of these investments that you're doing in the United States. Just during the months of November and December in the United States, amongst a population of 52.4 million African Americans and diaspora immigrants living amongst us, last year and the years before, we have spent up to $62 billion in 61 days on consumer engagement for the holiday season. I am saying to our people, we need to create a sovereign wealth investment fund out of spending patterns, even if it's just giving investment bonds, equity bonds as Christmas presents. We need to take that money to our mother continent, invest maximum inputs on the mother continent for the short term, for the long term, with the anticipation of spectacular returns on our investments.
Well, the COVID pandemic has actually taught us the hard way that agriculture is the way to go, because ideally when the lockdowns we've had here in Uganda, you find that people in the villages who are really into agriculture, they have not been as affected as actually most of the town dwellers. So how do we use the pandemic to reinvent agriculture that is going to work for us?
One of the most critical things that needs to be done is exactly what you have committed to today. Our people need to be informed, inspired, and excited about all of these potentials, which are really already in our hands. I'm reminded of one of the great orators of the African American civil rights movement, the Reverend Dr. Adam Clayton Powell, who admonished his audience, what is in your hands? What do you already have? What has the Creator blessed you with? Uganda has been blessed with waters, the most pristine, pure waters that literally contributed to world history, as the White Nile is, of course, the source of the greatest river in world history, the longest river in the world. Uganda has been blessed with this demographic dividend to be the second youngest nation in the world at a time when other nations like Germany and Japan, Britain, South Korea, Singapore are critically worried because they have not been having enough babies to support their future. And without enough babies to support their future, these nations, increasingly, they're not even growing enough food to feed themselves. Japan doesn't grow enough food to feed itself. Singapore, South Korea, Great Britain, Germany. So we have to now step into place and say, we can supply that need with the best foods your people could ever eat, and perhaps even your fertility will return to your nation in the process of that. There is so much that we can do. The clock it's not like we're running out of time, but by not acting promptly upon all of our potentials, we're actually digging the hole deeper from which we must crawl out of. I was recently in Uganda, and unfortunately, the 4th week of my 6-week trip there, I got malaria. And when I got into the hospital system, it was amazing that my malaria, which I knew was malaria, I'm very familiar with the disease, was called COVID-19. And so I saw many things from inside, and I saw the rush of foreign pharmaceutical companies and hospital investors rushing into Uganda because of this pandemic. Well, I am saying to my brothers and sisters all across the diaspora, there is no reason in the world that Korean investors, Indian investors, Chinese investors, Malaysian, Singapore, Japan, it goes on, Arab investors should be beating us to building up our motherland continent. So we've got a steep hill to climb. I'm very excited that with the conversations like we're having right here today, as well as the spectrum of inputs necessary to complete a complex task, we are going to be able to inform, inspire, and excite more and more people to be a part of what it is that you and I are doing.
Well, I must thank you very much, Obi, Keid, Awadu, for really making time and being with us. I know you have a very, very busy schedule, but this information you've shared with the Ugandan audience actually is inspiring. Now, in 30 seconds, your last word to the viewer.
What we have been talking about has been a brilliant conversation, but people need to realize there are so many nuances, so many details. This is deeply interconnected with all aspects of society, and it does require us to be focused on the critical inputs necessary to accelerate a rapid recovery. I'm talking about a highly accelerated recovery. I do have a book that I've written that I think is very useful. I know is very useful because everywhere the book goes, people are giving me feedback. It goes to Europe. They say, I have to talk to you. Nigeria, the Congo, and of course, when 2 people started reading this book simultaneously in Uganda, knew each other and said, we got to get this, brother, everything changed dynamically. So I'm going to ask people to let your attention focus on it. hopefully we'll have many more conversations about this potential, as well as the dynamic potential of agritourism and natural resource tourism in this beautiful country, the pearl of Africa. We love you so, Uganda.
Yes, thank you very much. And I must tell you that I've started reading your book, The Blackest Soils. And indeed, it is a very inspiring book, which I encourage actually people in the agricultural sector to look out for it, because it is one that will help us add value onto our agriculture. Amanda Kuola Mazima saying bye-bye.